Don't worry. All right, we're all in. And now all the streams are being populated. All right, Dan, give it 30 seconds and then, oh, I see someone else has joined us.
There we go. Hey, just a real quick question before we go live. Pronunciation, Amit Elazari.
Amit Elazari, yes.
Amit, okay.
Amit.
You tell me when, Priyanka. Priyanka, are we ready?
Brett.
All right, and it looks like we are ready to go. Good afternoon and welcome to the Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy at Purdue's virtual event, Gen AI and National Security. I'm Dan Kurtenbach, the Institute's Chief Growth Officer. The Krach Institute is the world's preeminent trusted technology accelerator. As the leader of a new category of tech diplomacy, the Institute integrates technology expertise, Silicon Valley strategies, and foreign policy tools to build the global trusted tech network, a network of governments, companies, organizations, and individuals to accelerate the innovation and adoption of trusted technology. Today, we are thrilled and honored to have three great panelists. Let's start with Rob. Rob Imig is a senior architect for R&D for the federal practice at Palantir Technologies, where he leads the development and advancement of Palantir's most innovative engineering capabilities, including edge computing, space sensing, and artificial intelligence. Over the course of 10 years at Palantir, Rob has led engineering teams in both the commercial and government businesses, and allowing him to see a broad spectrum of problems and solutions firsthand. I'll also note that Rob is a senior industry fellow at the Krach Institute, and we are lucky to have him. Dr. Amit Elazari is the co-founder and CEO of Open Policy, the world's first tech-enabled policy and advocacy company dedicated to democratize technology policy and access to lobbying. She teaches at UC Berkeley and serves as a member of the External Advisory Committee for Berkeley's Center of Long-Term Cybersecurity. Prior to Open Policy, she was head of global cybersecurity policy at Intel Corporation, responsible for shaping and executing Intel's global security policy and government affairs engagement across all of Intel's technologies. She has an extensive background in technical, policy, and legal roles, practiced high-tech venture capital and M&A law at one of Israel's largest law firms, GKH Law. And last but not least, Dr. Divyansh Kaushik is the Associate Director for Emerging Technologies and National Security at the Federation of American Scientists. His doctoral work at Carnegie Mellon focused on designing reliable artificial intelligence systems that align with human values. In addition to his work on Capitol Hill advocating for defense, science, innovation, and immigration issues, he has also played a key role in the establishment of the Congressional Graduate Research and Development Caucus. He is also a frequent contributor to leading publications, including National Defense Magazine, The Dispatch, Daily Caller, and Forbes, sharing his insights and expertise on a variety of topics relevant to national security and innovation. A reminder that we will have time for Q&A from the audience towards the end of the webinar, so please post your questions in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them as soon as we can. Okay, after that introduction, let's get into it. Let's start at a high level with an introduction to generative AI. Rob, we'll begin with you. What is generative AI and how does it differ from other AI technologies that we are more so frequently hearing about?
Yeah, Yeah. And hey, Dan, thanks for having me again. Excited to discuss, Gen AI and national security with you and the panelists here. So simply put, generative AI is artificial intelligence, right, that can create new content. So for me, I find it really easiest to think of a spectrum. On one side, you have really classic computing, right? I give a computer instructions, and the computer follows them, right? The human, the programmer, is the one with the real knowledge and knows how to instruct the computer to give it a very specific instruction set, right, on how to solve a problem. The computer, right, its job and what it's good at is taking that instruction set and following it at very high speeds and making it scalable, right? There's no ambiguity though, right? The computer does what you tell it to do. And then on the other side of that spectrum, you have human thought, and we are inherently creative people, right? And there's a huge aspect of context though needed when we answer questions and how to interpret people's answers to questions, right? We may answer differently, depending on where we grew up, for example, or depending the time of day, right? Um, uh, and there's just tons of ambiguity, right, in those answers sometimes. Gen AI, really falls in the middle between that, algorithmic computational kind of reasoning and human thought. So it's a form of AI, capable of generating again its own output, like text and images. You feed it training data and think of like Q&A style pairs that you would feed it, right? And then it can generate new data based off of new arbitrary inputs. So it excites us the most, and really what I'm passionate about is the pace of development that we're seeing right now in Gen AI and the amount of innovation in the field. And what that means is the amount of opportunity there is, right, for all of us. The last part of your question was asking how I think it differs from other technologies. So with most technologies, right, when they're discovered, you have a decent idea what they will unlock, right, and how our lives will change based on that innovation. There's a fairly clear upper bound, right? With truly transformative innovations, right, and inventions, think of like the light bulb, nuclear energy, right, the internet, great example. You realize you have something there immediately, right? But you don't really fully grasp, and you cannot fully grasp how it's going to really change the future. You just know it's going to change the future. I truly feel like we're in that moment with AI and really specifically Gen AI and LLMs and some of the movement we're seeing. These new, to focus on LLMs for a second, these models, trillions or more parameters, we're developing a technology with a scale of processing that's really impossible for the human mind to even comprehend. Some researchers are now saying, we're seeing sparks of artificial general intelligence, which basically means we're seeing, forms of reasoning that approximate the way humans think, which is wild. So it's an incredible transformative technology, and truly feel we're just at the beginning of it.
Thank you for that, Rob. So Divyansh, can you talk to us a little bit about the implications of the technology as Rob just described it, as they pertain to matters of national security? In other words, how should we think through the likely problems posed by Gen AI for the U.S. government and that of its allies?
Yeah, first, thanks, Dan, for having me on. Rob, you hit it on point. So that was a great summary. I would say there are a lot of opportunities and risks associated with Gen AI and in the sphere of national security. Now, of course, if I'm looking at opportunities, it's not new, right? Like the National Nuclear Security Administration has been using advanced AI methods to do non-proliferation verification, right? To verify whether countries are complying with non-proliferation treaties. Now they are trying to build new kinds of models using like the AlphaGo style methodology to do game theory, to game theorize scenarios where, say, there are, instead of having two peer nuclear powers, US and Russia, you have three peer nuclear powers, US, Russia, and China, and two of them now gang up on one. So how do you game theorize that scenario? That is something that they're now starting to look at through Go style models. when it comes to LLMs, there are of course like opportunities where you could do enhanced intelligence analysis. You've got you can sort through vast amounts of intelligence data quickly and accurately, identifying trends, patterns that human analysts may miss. Now, of course, there are products that are currently being deployed around supply chain and logistics management, how to more efficiently deploy deploy logistics in the battlefield. But there are also risks. One of the most commonly cited risks with Gen AI is around disinformation and deepfakes. Right? We have a very important election coming up next year. How will the use of deepfakes impact the electorate? That is a big concern that a lot of us in the national security community have. Right? We're seeing the use of deepfakes even domestically, right? Like we've seen at least 2 campaigns use deepfakes in their political advertisements. Now, is that giving a pass to Russia and China that, hey, you can use deepfakes too? And they were just trying to sow disinformation using deepfakes about the fires in Hawaii. There was a report about China doing that. Now, there are other areas where adversaries can engage in information warfare, destabilizing fragile democracies. Then there are cybersecurity threats. We just like a couple of years ago indicted a couple of Russian FSB officers for planting malwares in our nuclear power plants. Now, imagine like things like that happening, but on a more frequent scale. Imagine like Keystone style hacks, people trying to attempt those almost every month, right? So that is something that we have to be concerned about. There are concerns around what happens with like if you are developing a model for drug discovery. Could you also accidentally use that could a nefarious actor use that for building a pathogen, right? So how do we work around those opportunities as well as risks at the same time? That's a big discussion happening. I think suits well for this webinar.
Thanks for that, Divyansh. And you hit on some really good points there. To the last one about opportunities and risks, I'd love to turn over to Amit to talk a little bit more about the unique regulatory landscape and legal issues that the federal government, like I'm thinking primarily about the U.S. federal government, but also that of its allies, has to consider with regard to its technology. What can you add to what Rob and Divyansh have already mentioned?
Yeah, thank you so much, and also a pleasure to be here with you. It's Jewish New Year Eve, so Shana Tova to all our listeners who are celebrating today the Jewish New Year together with me. And it really is such a pleasure to be collaborating with all of you and learning so much. I want to double down on what I view is one of the most critical economic and almost like political science features of generative AI that should, in my perspective, should kind of guide us as we think on the national security, cybersecurity, technology regulation, policy implication, which is the network effects, both in terms of the creation of positive externalities and what we call pollution or negative externalities of generative AI. And this is a paradigm shift because of the exponential innovation and opportunity for social welfare, for growth, for economic innovation, for technology advancements that is really unique to generative AI because it's such a leap, right, in so many areas. And because of the potential of what we call ecosystem network effects, we have to be very thoughtful. And it is a paradigm shift. When I try to think about it from an innovation and tech policy paradigm, with the exception of connectivity and the internet, I'm not aware of a conversation that has, fueled so much, potential implications we need to take into account. If you couple that together with the situation where we're at right now from a geopolitical competitiveness perspective, the fact that a lot of these generative AI is depending on skilled workforce, advancements in compute and semiconductors, right, where we already are dealing with a very vulnerable, right, supply chain, as we like to frame it, and the importance of cultivating innovation in AI right now to all the world economics, right, economies that are nation states that are competing with each other. The bottom line is we really have to be cautious and thoughtful, because taking the right turn is not something that will just be, an intellectual property law we will be able to fix, or a regulation we will be able to amend, or a standard we will be able to just, update like a framework we have done with NIST. If we don't take the right approach right now, the network effects of impacting the open source innovator ecosystem, right, or the workforce, or the ability of the US to maintain leadership in innovation and AI could be dramatic. This is because, above all, generative AI is still emerging. A lot of the development requires standards-based approaches, and we are facing competition. The US is facing competition. Developers can go to other areas of the world where they can operate more freely, right? And I think the main issue is with developing AI, with generative AI, the barriers for innovation, and this includes also the barriers for the adversaries that are innovating with their attacks, are getting lower and lower. So I want to summarize this point because it's really critical to understand. The situation with AI is not just yet another technology policy innovation. If we are not thoughtful, the impact for the US and other nations and the international collaboration can have detrimental effects on our ability to progress from a workforce, from an innovation, and that ultimately impacts economy and our state of national security. So with that in mind, I will just summarize where we're at. I think the approach that is being taken has been discussed this week in DC with both the Schumer Summit, some of the testimonies we have seen, both judiciary and Senate, and others, of being on one side thoughtful, on the other side pushing the needle when it comes to adoption, measurability of adoption of standard-based technologies, things that are based on the NIST management framework, things that are based on the international standard works that had been led in ISO IEC, and calling on one side for more accountability, but accountability that is based on regulations that actually make sense because they are baked or founded on international standard, with more technologies that can actually attest that the solutions that technologies are having, the trustworthiness and safety that we need, that makes sense. But we have to be very thoughtful. We have to maintain flexibility because it's not a situation we will be able to reverse. If we lose leadership, we cannot afford decades, right, of trying to pass another law and get more, funding into to maintain leadership. This is a pivotal moment.
Thank you for that. I have other questions here, but I'd love to hear, Divyansh, your response to that. Any additional thoughts or points with what Amit was saying?
No, I completely agree. I think, even when you go back and look at Senator Schumer's speech at CSIS when he announced the safe AI innovation framework, he was very specific in how it needs to be innovation first. When he was talking yesterday or the day before about the Insight forums, he was very mentioning so clearly and so well that EU went too early, too fast, too big, and now they have to scale back because they did not really fully understand what the implications are of the technology and the laws that they are proposing, which is why he is trying to make sure that the way the US approaches legislating here is thoughtful. It's not impulsive, which is good. The other thing to what Amit mentioned about the NIST risk management framework and standards, I think standards are extremely important. The NIST cybersecurity framework became the de facto cybersecurity standard around the world, essentially. And I think the AI RMF 1.0, it's a first step, of course. They're working diligently to scale up adoption across industry, to see what updates need to be made there. How do we even measure the risks? A lot of people, including myself, we've been saying there are a lot of risks involved, X, Y, and Z. How do we exactly measure them? And so how can we measure whether we've been making progress? And those are technical questions that agencies like NIST that have done this for a long, long time are extremely well suited to answer. Their work with the EU, for instance, like is another example where NIST has worked with its partners in the European Union to come up with like 5 areas, including grid management, agriculture, healthcare, transportation, on how do we design shared standards that are not just for companies in the US, but like European companies are also following. I think that's a great way to look at going about regulating the models.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Rob, I guess to that point, we've spoken a little bit here about the threats posed by Gen AI, and that often seems to dominate the headlines. But can we talk a little bit more specifically about the ways that Gen AI tools can help in predicting or potentially preventing potential conflicts between nations?
Yeah, for sure, and it's a fascinating question. And I guess also just to hit on Amit's point, or her points, and kind of her the one she doubled down on. My brief interpretation or summary of that is look, this is not just another technology innovation, right? There's something like truly powerful here, right? And I think we've all kind of made that point. And a lot of what Krach is doing and other folks are doing is just making sure our leadership and policymakers understand that, right? That this is something truly transformative. The second thing is, look, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Right. So it's like you can do truly great things with this. That even pluses up the need for responsible AI and policies, et cetera, right? Okay, so back to your question about conflicts. It's a fascinating problem to think about. So let's focus on the problem of preventing potential conflicts, right? So and you can study this, and people that have studied this will know this, but for any conflict, there's a series of events, right, that lead up to that conflict. You can see this throughout history where there's multiple flags and signs that something's coming, right? And there's many people whose job it is, right, to monitor events like this and flag it. And there's data for that, and there's human expertise, et cetera, right? This type of AI that we're talking about here, right, is incredibly good at learning patterns like that, and suggesting the next token or suggesting the next thing what might come next. So the real power, I guess, that we see is this concept of deterrence, right, and preventing escalation. If you can help the decision makers and the folks whose job it is to look at this stuff make more data informed, quicker decisions, right? Then yeah, there's tremendous opportunity there.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, I guess to that point, Amit, as more countries invest in Gen AI, obviously America, but also adversaries, how should existing or future global alliances existing like the United Nations adapt to address the potential challenges and these opportunities?
Again, I would like to, up level one of the themes that I see and maybe draw from that a few recommendations. So we talked about the importance of standards. What I feel that sometimes it's hard to understand it is standards already exist in the area of AI. I personally participated in the Israeli national body for SC42. SC42 is the committee at ISO that develops a lot of these standards that are the backbone of the implementation of the EUA Act, and has, of course, the contribution also from the US. So when we think about the most prominent standards that are going to guide us when it comes to the trustworthiness, measurability, assessment of high-risk AI under the applicable regulations, that work has already started to get done. And we really need more experts in the conversations. One of the things that I'm very passionate about with open policy is connecting innovative entities, smaller entities into the conversation, because it's not as easy to participate in standards. It just requires a lot of time, requires a lot of dedication. There's a lot of text. There is a small amount of experts. And we really need, because it's very important for us that the standard systems remains consensus based, is connected to all these innovative players. We just really need to think about how nations around the world are committed to cultivating the international synthesization work around technology, and then thereof their adoption. So if we put the work to put an ISO IEC standard together, how do we make sure it's being adopted in the European ESOs, for example, so it's actually effective when it comes to fostering those measurements? So that's very actionable, very important. I think recommendation where there is a lot of room for international collaboration, because a lot of those standard-based organizations are built on international cooperation. You can only participate for a national body. The second piece is coming together for finding consensus around what is the innovative platform we must build. So right now we are struggling with Gen AI. In security, we always have new innovations. There are new attack surface. And it's becoming clear to me that we must focus more and more on the platform we're going to solve the hard questions on, who is in the conversation, and how do we make sure that we're actually talking with experts and technologists. By the way, I believe it requires technology, that convening in rooms is important, but we must scale this to connect with innovators, and that's what I'm doing with open policy. But we really have to give thought for the platforms in which we are scaling and creating that openness. And I am not sure that only multilateral approaches that are treaty-based are going to work here. We have experience, and we know that sometimes we need to also approach, trade agreements, bilateral agreements, other types of coalitions. The collaboration between the EU and US is very important, Five Eyes. So we really need to leverage all those tools in our toolbox. But above all, reach out to the innovative communities, to this universe of unicorns and startups that are emerging in that place. I'm thinking about companies like Protect AI and Eden Layer and Carinium and many others. We see in that ecosystem, and these are the innovators. We have to bring them to the table. So I think this is my strongest call to action, is to think about better platform to scale our engagement with our innovators, or else it will be very hard to maintain the regulatory approaches that is actually consistent with innovation and technology.
Perfect. Divyansh, any thoughts there? I'd like to hear a little bit more from you about how nations can work together to establish guidelines or norms around this use, especially as it pertains to warfare, think about surveillance, things of that nature.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with everything that was just said. Yeah, one of the really good examples of how nations could start forming some standards together, was I would say the cybersecurity standards that we have today are a good example of that. And then there are, ISET is working towards, where India, United States, Australia, Japan, these countries are working towards like shared standards for communication protocols, right? And other emerging technologies. So those are important aspects, right? Now, and as for the innovation side of things, where nations come together to innovate, like let's look at how Europe does Horizon Europe research, right? It is not just the grants are not just restricted to European countries. People from other countries can participate as well, right? So they allow for that cross collaboration to, hey, let's come together from a global perspective. We will conduct research on these topics, right? Now, NATO has has come up with Diana more recently, right? Which is going to look on the warfare side of things, which is going to look at primarily national security critical emerging technologies. How do we incubate new startups that are developing some of those technologies for NATO partners and allies, which is great. The other side, where how countries could work together to like set acceptable norms, I think that is a great, we've had a lot of experience with that, right? Whether it's through nuclear non-proliferation regimes or biological weapons convention, chemical weapons treaty. But we need to make sure that whatever we come up with actually has teeth, right? Like it shouldn't be like the biological weapons convention, which has a staff of 3, and the Russian leader can come on television and openly claim that I have biological weapons and it does nothing. right? So how do we make sure that there are ground rules on surveillance? So how do we make sure that there are that these technologies are not being used for genocidal purposes, which they are right now in Xinjiang? How companies in democratic countries are not participating in development of such technology, right? Export control regimes that, including the export controls that the White House announced last year, will help make sure some of this does not happen going forward. But how do we future-proof these, future-proof these export control mechanisms and have a shared understanding amongst democratic nations that, hey, Netherlands, South Korea, Japan, like, you're also chip makers, you're big chip makers, just like us. Let's try to have a shared understanding where these chips should be used, where not. So that's one example, like how the US has been working. The other thing I would think, like, how the US government needs to work with its allies, like, everybody needs to have a shared understanding how important it will be for all of them to improve their domestic cybersecurity defenses. Yeah, the adversaries are going to build powerful adversarial tools, powerful adversarial models we will have to defend. So let's make sure that, we don't have ransomware happening every week or every other week or whatever. We don't have SolarWinds style hacks. That we implement strict regulations that prevent misuse of the technologies within our borders, so that then, leading by example is going to be critical here. How does the US go, the US partner with India to be like, hey, you have great, you have a great tech industry. We have a great tech industry. We want to make sure that how the tech is being developed is being used for good. Let's come up with shared principles that define how we legislate around these areas, and I think that's going to be important. So I'm keeping my eye out on the Global Partnership on AI forum that's happening in New Delhi in December, which resulted as from G7. So hopefully that will provide some of these shared understanding, frameworks amongst countries that see eye to eye on some of these issues.
That's super helpful, and we could talk about that for the rest of the time we have, actually, because I want to hear more about what you think the right path is there, and I think we'll actually get to that closer to the end of the hour. But I do want to bring Rob back in here. So whether or not you can reflect your company's perspective, I'd love to hear more about how industry is thinking about informing the federal government about what it's doing versus seeking collaboration, or in some cases, likely just continuing to do what they're going to do, waiting for regulation to catch up. Can you talk me through that thought process and the logic there?
Yeah, for sure, Dan. We view it's hugely critical, right, for the government and industry to obviously work together on a lot of these, and we're starting to see this. I think both my colleagues here have mentioned some of the White House policy and Chuck Schumer's meeting, and we're seeing really good signs of that, honestly. So leaders from really top tech companies are now collaborating with government decision makers and on some of these policies to not only help understand the technology, obviously, which is hugely important, and how certain companies are approaching it, right? But then also to suggest regulations, right, or how we how government should be thinking about it, right, and how they should be using it, and giving the right fuel, right, so that it can move forward fast and continue the innovation pace, right, but also do that in a responsible way.
Thank you. Amit, I'd love to hear your take on that as well. If you have any thoughts to how the federal government or its allies should be working closer with industry in order to help try to set that condition such that we are still in a competitive space to innovate while also putting the right guardrails around the development of that technology.
I really love this question, I feel, because it connects to my passion right now. Working with industry is essential, but we have to embrace two critical conclusions. One, the most powerful form of policy in the world is code. I'm inviting our audience to think about the most powerful copyright law in the world. Okay? It's DRM. It's digital rights management solutions. What is the most powerful form of, data access policy in the world? It's encryption, right? Cryptography. In the end, our norms must be supported with tools that allow their wide adoption, measurability, auditability at scale. This is what is being done right now in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is impactful, and we have still many attacks, and we are struggling because, especially with generative AI, we are constantly, right, the attack surface is changing. We're seeing new types of innovations, and the adversaries are always, remember, we are always on the defense. They have only 0.1, 0.01, right? They just need a gap, and we need to stay protected almost 100% all the time. But yet we are leveraging so many innovations and technologies, as well as auditability at scale. And if we really want to succeed, the partnership with industry should be also not about just the principles, right? We have to have the baseline, we have to have the principles. It has to be also on the technology. And the technology would not just be the big companies, because they're amazing, they're innovators, but we know there is a whole ecosystem of startups and innovators and investors that are also cultivating this movement. And especially in security, if you look at a lot of the innovation life cycle, it is coming from those startups. And that is true also for AI. It is also true for privacy. It's true for many of the defensive technologies being used, including by DoD and the nation. So with that in mind, I want us to get a lot more concrete. If we have voluntary commitments, which are great and important, and we are committing to do red teaming, how are we cultivating the universe of AI startup companies that can provide us with the provenance, the watermarking, those solutions? How are we inviting them to be part of the technical conversation and have access to the standards? This is what I'm passionate about. Scaling the platform to have the right setting for that robust, persistent, consistent, effective type of industry government collaboration, including, by the way, globally. And it needs to move from the filings of the comments, right, to a type of system where 99% of the market can actually participate, including those innovative entities. And that's what I'm putting my energy in. That's what I'm passionate about in open policy.
Divyansh, what's your take on the same question?
I think that's both of them are absolutely correct. I would add one more component to this, which is building state capacity. How do we make sure that standard setting bodies are able to hire the smartest talent there is? Like, how are they able to, if if someone who's graduating from a computer science PhD is going to go make $400,000 in the industry, versus the government takes 9 months to make them a job offer, and then they may make like 1/4 of that. That's not really the way the government will be able to hire smart people to build these standards, to develop these tools, to help the industry as well. Right. So I would say that one of the very important things here is going to be, how do we change federal hiring? How do we do better procurement? We already are really bad at procurement, especially in the defense sector. And how do we make sure that we're designing our procurement guidelines in a way that measure up to the challenge of a rapidly evolving field? That's going to be another thing. So I'm concerned that especially with the budget fight coming up, that agencies like NIST or agencies like the Department of Energy, which have technical capacity, which have the technical talent, will not be able to keep that technical talent given the budget cuts coming. The other thing that Department of Energy wants, for instance, to create compute infrastructure for national labs to design and develop foundation models on their own. There was a hearing in Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee where the Department of Energy witnesses were like, hey, we would like to create these models ourselves so that we are better able to understand the risks rather than just relying on what big companies are saying are the risks, right? So that we are not just like saying, oh, because they said this is a risk, let's act as if this is the risk and go and legislate. Rather, have a better understanding of how we are of what the risks are. At the same time, that computing infrastructure will also allow the agency to design foundation models for national security purposes on classified data that they cannot give to OpenAI or Anthropic. Right? So those are things that I would like to add to that, to those answers.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. And you touched on two really important key points there, especially for our audience. One is federal hiring and getting the right people into the job. Obviously, the Krach Institute was founded to work with industry, with academia, and with the federal government and our allies in order to make sure that everybody has the right information to make decisions, both on the industrial side, but also on the regulatory side, and also procurement. So to that last point, I want to talk to Rob a little bit more about the sophistication of the federal employees that you've been working with over at Palantir. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the education that you as a company go through when you're working with your stakeholders in the government, and then how you've seen perhaps the sophistication change over the last decade.
Yeah, it's a great question. And just on the on the hiring talent, like I couldn't agree more. I think with that point, it's something. I know we're in a little as a publicly traded like software company, right? That has about half of our business is through like defense and government related work, right? We face some of the same things, right? It's like where some of the best hires or potential hires, right, and best candidates from some of the top tier schools don't want to go into the defense sector. So we do a lot of educational work around that, and uh, it's super important. Like I couldn't it's one of the reasons why I love working with Krach and Purdue and some of these schools that are really promoting that, because again, I couldn't agree more with that we need the top tier talent, right, to be thinking about these types of problems, right? Rather than making video games or something, right? It's like you want them thinking about these high quality problems. Um, uh, so yeah, I absolutely agree with that. The other thing I'd say is so to your point about like working with government and federal on this, we like at Palantir like view very very strongly with working right next to our customers, right? So Alex Karp, our CEO, has this concept of taste the soup, which is like in French cooking, where like the chef comes out and tastes the soup and sees how good it is. We like sending our software engineers and forward deployed engineers, we call them, like to the customer, right? Whether that's a Fortune 500 company or a defense customer, and sitting right next to a soldier or like somebody in more of a civil institute, and learn these things, right? And it's a two-way street, right? Where we're learning how their minds think and how they use their data, right? And then they're also learning from us of how to think about that, right? And it's a new way sometimes of how you think about these types of problems and how you apply these types of technologies to those problems. So we just view that's a hugely important element of it, right? Is getting in front of these people and sitting next to them, and really the education piece, which again I think Krach has done a good job of, and has set up the right kind of platform to start that education. We just need more of it.
Thanks for that, Rob. Really appreciate it. Amit, I want to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about your experience, obviously having lived in multiple countries, how the U.S. government approaches this idea of accessing the best talent that it possibly has. How do you think it could do it better? And are there any like good analogs that you can think of from your experiences?
The accent is Israeli. I grew up in sunny Tel Aviv, came here to do my PhD in technology law at UC Berkeley in Southern California in 2016. So I think there are a couple of insights, and many of them have been celebrated, acknowledged, and noticed by the administration. But the reality is, without additional funding, I think it will be we will be struggling, right, to really implement our vision. So first of all, obviously, I work with innovative companies like 5DX that are very supportive of the national cybersecurity strategy, right? That's a for workforce development. That's a great vehicle. We have an implementation plan that was released. Now we need to get actionable, and this is exactly what the White House is doing with the leadership of Assistant Director Camille Stewart and the team in the National Cyber Director in the Office of the President. But we need to get the funding there so we can implement programs like that. If we are, other nations, when they want to cultivate, right, a workforce education program, they put funding, they put efforts, or they have structural institutions in place. Like in Israel, it's the military, where a lot of our startup ecosystem comes from the intelligence community, 8200, and so much of the skilling is happening there. But this requires structural investments, and I think the U.S. has some great leadership, some ideas in this space. The DoD just released their strategy for cybersecurity. Again, workforce, big component. So we just need to be actionable about the recommendations we made and start implementing them with the right funding in place, the collaboration we need with the private industry, and of course, nonprofits and academic institutions. So great leadership already from the administration, needs more support, needs the funding, so we won't lead back. Secondly, creating opportunities for hands-on, training, right, and just entry-level positions. Huge struggle. I'll just give you a quick note, something that I'm not sure is as appreciated. With generative AI, there is actually a concern that many of the entry-level positions in cyber are going to disappear. Why? Because a lot of the work could be analyst work, right? As you just come in, and now it's being complemented or exchanged for generative AI. So we just need to be very mindful of creating that entry-level opportunities. And I think this is across the board when it comes to AI, security, and other area. And of course, we have, I will fail if I don't mention it. It will be like an omission. We really need to continue to think about our immigration reforms. I think that the U.S. is constantly thinking about that, but that's an area that is really important. And, industry has a lot of ideas, a lot of feedback in that space that goes way beyond, just the technology area. I mentioned already the network effects, the secondary markets that are cultivating the innovation, the manufacturing of chips, implementing the CHIPS Act. That's important. That's important for what we're doing on AI, but everything that is needed for the workforce when it comes to supporting education, immigration, and creating those funding opportunities for workforce development, I think all of that will come together. And, of course, there are going to be places in the world we're just going to continue to see more money comes in, centralized approaches. In Israel, we have the benefits of the army that is training a lot of people at scale exists here as well. But I think starting to think about how we create that persistent approach of funding and implementation of the great strategies we already thought about will be very important.
That's perfect. And you actually touched on one of Divyansh's passion projects, and that's immigration. I want to ask you briefly, and then I'm going to go to the next question. But Divyansh, can you talk a little bit about your work trying to figure out the best way to pull in talent from foreign countries to the United States on this subject?
Oh, it'll take another webinar, but let's try. So here's the thing. When you look at the most elite AI researchers, top 0.5% of the AI researchers, like people who gave oral talks at NeurIPS, which is the biggest, most prestigious machine learning conference, only 20% of them studied in the US for undergraduate. 69% of them work in the US. So we are the magnet for global talent because we are providing opportunity. And that is not because of our immigration system. It is despite our immigration system, right? The Defense Department has been asking Congress for one very specific thing. Let us hire the 100 top scientists we want to bring to the United States every year, just 100. 100 a year. And they're like, let us do that. Well, I'll let you imagine what the outcome has been so far. It was a Republican bill that went through the House several times, got killed in the Senate. Hopefully we will get something through this time around. But if for those of us who saw the Select China Committee's hearing on emerging technology, Josh Wolf's testimony, where he was like, we need two things, essentially: funding for long-term basic science and fixing our immigration system. In the defense sector, over 50% of STEM professionals are foreign-born. So at the same time, like the NDIA, their vital signs report, in their vital signs report, nearly like 83% of defense companies it is extremely difficult for us to find qualified STEM talent. There are going to be nearly 300,000 semiconductor jobs going unfilled if we do not fix some of these immigration challenges. There are a couple of efforts currently in play. Senator Rounds, Republican of South Dakota, joined with Senator Dick Durbin, a Democratic senator from Illinois, to come out with a bill that would allow highly educated STEM PhD holders to stay in the United States if they pass a labor certification test. It is incredible to see that bill because even the labor union supported it. Like, everybody is recognizing that there are more unfilled jobs than the number of workers looking for jobs. So how do we address some of those issues? There was a proposal in NDAA last year, in the House NDAA, that would have specifically on defense critical technologies, that if you are working on defense critical technologies, let's bring you over and provide you a green card, not a temporary visa, so that you can become a citizen one day and get that security clearance and actually work on the classified stuff. I think those are things that we should address and address soon.
Thank you for that. You're right. And I do think it would be a topic for another virtual event, and we'd love to have you back to discuss that one. Okay, well, what I'm going to do now, we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes, but I wanted to give each of the three panelists one more chance to provide advice to people who will be watching this this virtual event, either where to find more information that they deem like good for this subject, or if you already feel sufficiently educated, how you can get more engaged if the subjects that we've discussed here are of interest to you. We'll start with you, Rob.
Yeah, of course, and maybe before with the closing statement, Ami made a great point about a comment about how some of this technology can really replace entry-level jobs, right? And it's something that people usually immediately think about when they think of this technology, and it's a lot of talked about. And look, it's something immediately people jump to, and there's entire companies, right, that are having to rethink their business strategy, right, because of this. I do think, however, sometimes it does that concept, right, can overshadow the potential of human in the loop, like acceleration, right? And it is something that Palantir, and we're personally really focused on. But it's like, how do we use technology like this to provide the Iron Man suit to users, right? To move through their data and make decisions like this. And we're kind of founded on the concept of this human computer teaming. So there's some really interesting things you can do when you start to put LLMs and technologies like this in charge of certain functions or decisions, right, in your overall decision-making process, whether that's your very complicated business that you're running or your organization, like a government organization, and then have a human actually like manage those different kind of agents, right, that are making these micro decisions, and maybe some of them are made by computers or these algorithms, right, and then others, you have humans overlooking, deciding how to roll that out, right. It's a really good foundation and kind of way to think about it, to start to introduce these types of capabilities. So anyways, again, we could have a whole webinar on just, I think, that part, but just wanted to touch on that. So yeah, we're obviously doing a lot about this. There's a bunch of stuff, I'd suggest if folks haven't seen it, some of the stuff that's been in the news lately, about some of these White House and on the policy side, these meetings. There's some really actually like pretty solid like topics coming up at these things, and companies are making real commitments to how they're going to respond. And then the other thing, I mean, on our side, we just had a huge AI conference, AIPCon, that we just hosted. We have public videos about that you can access and see how people are using this type of technology to really kind of transform their business. Which I would highly suggest if you're interested in sort of the applications of things like this.
Great.
But thanks Dan for having me.
Thanks Rob for joining. Divyansh, over to you.
Yeah, I would say just to add to that, there's a lot of great material out there when it comes to sector-specific issues that you can find on CRS. If anybody wants to get a real, just like, high-level summary with some data that will then also provide them additional references to check out, I highly recommend starting with CRS reports. But would also mention that people look up all the work the Federation of American Scientists has done on this, and all the great work the Krach Institute has been putting out, including all these webinars. So I would highly recommend that people look those up. I think it is important that people who are making decisions or who are in position to influence those decisions are not just relying on op-eds and podcasts, but actually reading the technical material as well. So highly recommend looking up the proceedings of top machine learning conferences, checking out the abstracts, reading books that are being put out by really smart people on these issues. That's all I have to say on that. And thanks, Dan, for having me.
Thanks for joining. Let me wrap it up, and we will do a quick outro.
Thanks for having me. I think for me, my biggest message is for the entrepreneurs. And when I say entrepreneurs, I also mean like unicorns, and this would not be a surprise because it's been a consistent theme for my messaging. But, I really truly believe, and you see this now with companies like Hugging Face, like taking the front lines when it comes to open source innovation. An amazing company. We really need the entrepreneurs, the startups, the VC community to be part of this conversation. The US is not going to maintain innovative leadership if the full ecosystem that is supporting the positive, network externalities of AI, which is really amplified in generative AI, when you have so much more code production and the barriers to produce code are becoming lower and lower, will not be engaged. So first of all, I want to empower you, entrepreneurs and investment firms and startups and founders and everyone that is listening. You can have a role in this conversation. This is not just something that is happening in DC, in the Senate, or in like closed doors. You can engage. We need to do the job of facilitating a better translation. And Dan, you and the team here are doing a fantastic job. So thank you for your leadership with the Krach Institution and everything that we're doing here. But we need to really invite you entrepreneurs to the conversation. So I'm just going to give you some very concrete technical references. We talked about the NIST risk management framework. That is an important document. With the NIST cybersecurity framework revision, we're going to see more and more of that built into cyber. The body of standards work that is being done in the EU, you can go research ISO/IEC, SC42 work. There is a great work by the OECD. It's called the AI Observatory. There are many, many documents that go very in-depth technical and provide you a landscape of controls and innovative opportunities to work with us, like the watermarking, the provenance, the security technologies. I'm very excited to see what's going to come up with our entrepreneurs. And I'm inviting entrepreneurs that are listening to us to be part of the conversation. You can always reach out to me if you're interested, but you have, great resource for you that we just talked about in our panel.
Amit, thank you so much. And I want to extend a thank you to all of our panelists, Rob, Divyansh, Amit. We at the Krach Institute are eager to work with our members and our network toward advancing cross-sector, cross-agency cooperation on the critical issues that we've discussed today. A recording of this event will be available to stream on the Krach Institute page on LinkedIn. Additionally, please visit our website at techdiplomacy.org, where you can find links to sign up for our Tech Diplomacy Now newsletter and stay updated for future events and other opportunities to engage. Thanks again, and everyone have a good rest of your day.